There we go. Are you sitting comfortably? So, the last couple of weeks we've been running through this series called Building a Better Future. And it's based off sort of two ideas, two things in our thinking. The first one is this. We've been looking at the book of Acts, and Acts is the first book in the New Testament after the Gospels. It's the first part of the story of the early church. It records what the first and early Christians and followers of Jesus got up to as the message, the story of Jesus began to sort of outwork itself in the Mediterranean world. But also this phrase, this word that we've been thinking of, building a better future. This is one of our values, that as a church we are passionate, we are committed to building a better future, that actually we're not just going to live for now and today, that we want to do things that are going to impact and affect people in years and generations to come. And one of the reasons for that thinking is that everybody who has come before us has also had that mindset, that they have put things in place, they have given, they have served, they have built, they have invested into what we are living and being blessed by and experiencing today. And so this is something that we want to continue to do and continue to outwork. And so over the last few weeks, Sarah, in her message online, looked at the first part of the story where the Holy Spirit came and the church effectively was birthed, and people went out and they started sharing and witnessing to the things that Jesus had said and done, and the Holy Spirit was moving among them. And then Rebecca, a couple of weeks ago, she began to share actually about, well, what did that mean to be kind of powered by the Holy Spirit? And she looked at what how that found sort of its place in people's life and rhythm. And then Olivier last week, he was looking at one of Paul's missionary journeys, how people went out specifically with this purpose and this intention. But I love the fact that he looked at how it didn't always go to plan. It didn't always look. It didn't always outwork as we would have thought or wanted. But yet we can see this thread of God's plan and purpose running through. And I want to finish up this week by looking at someone that, when I thought about this series, when I thought about the book of Acts, immediately came to mind. There's someone that's only mentioned briefly in the book of Acts. There's not a lot of time and words devoted to them. But what this person did actually impacted and resonated throughout the whole of the rest of the New Testament and all the way up to our world and our time today. I don't know if you've ever had this moment in your life where you've ever felt out of your depth. Maybe quite literally in a swimming pool. Anyone scared of swimming? Oh, Jess, a few people. So my mum's husband and my sister's partner both have the same surname, Island, even though they're not related. And I find it really funny because usually you find an island in the middle of water and neither of them can swim. So when we go on holiday and you're playing the games in the pool, if the ball goes down the deep end, you have to send like Clara or one of the little kids to get it because the two older men can't swim, which I find hilarious. But it's that phrase, isn't it, that we often hear, are you out of your depth? I don't know if you ever started a new job. Anyone ever started a new job and think, why did I apply for this job? Clearly I'm not qualified or prepared. Anyone ever done that? Yeah, we've all been there. Sometimes you get into situations when, if you're a guy, you might relate to this, where you weren't really listening to what your wife was saying and you just said yes. And then you find yourself somewhere and you're thinking, why on earth am I here? And all you can remember is, I said yes to doing this, but I didn't really understand what it meant. Has anyone ever been there? Steve's looking like he knows that feeling, yeah. Some friends of ours were around the other week, and Josiah, who I went to school with, his wife is allergic to latex, and because not all like balloons and not everything is latex free, and Hannah's really allergic, he has to go to all the kids' parties, because there might be balloons there. And I was like, that's me out of my depth. Anything with like children under 10, I'm not in my comfort zone. I kind of experienced this, I think, the first time I traveled abroad by myself. I love traveling now, and I'm quite happy to travel abroad. Actually, I think traveling by yourself abroad is so much easier. You don't have to worry about where anybody else is. Usually, you've just got one bag, one passport, and you're on it. But the first time you travel abroad, where you've only ever been told by your parents or somebody else, well, here's your ticket, and this is what time the plane is or the train is, and where you go. And so I remember the first time that I traveled abroad by myself, and I felt completely out of my depth. I was like, I feel like this is such a grown-up thing to do, and none of my thinking, behaviors, or habits were particularly grown up at that time. And I guess we all have those moments in our lives, don't we? Whether it's a new job, a new social situation, a new thing that we step into, where we suddenly realize, I feel completely out of my depth. And I think that the person that we're going to look at this morning probably had that same moment in her experience. I looked up something. You can't just trust what you see on the internet. A pastor friend shared this video of a guy called Ben Crow. Anyone heard of Ben Crow? Do you know who Ben Crow is? No, I didn't know who he was either. He is a mindset coach, and he works with a lot of tennis players. Because I thought you had to be good at tennis to win championships. Apparently, you just need to think you're good at tennis. That's how good he is. But he works with a lot of high-performance sports people about their mindset and helping them overcome, like I was saying earlier, how do you overcome those negative thoughts? How do you come back from a game that you don't win? And often what happens in sport, and particularly in tennis, is when people don't play well, they get frustrated, and that only causes them to play worse. And somebody was explaining the other day about playing tennis and how they'd gotten to a situation where they were playing an opponent, and that opponent was slightly better than them in terms of their experience and their skill, but they'd only got that far because they were only good at one shot. And their coach basically said to them, don't worry that they're better than you on this one shot. If you can just keep returning the ball. This is Olivier told this story, wasn't it? Yeah, you can keep returning the ball, you're going to tire him out. And that's how a mindset coach works. That's how they get you and say, look, it doesn't matter that you're not as good as that person. If you think in the right way, you can overcome it. And so Ben Crow has made an absolute fortune being a mindset coach for tennis players. But he said this, there are 5 ways of thinking. There are 5 kind of mindsets that he said are self-sabotaging people and often trip us up. And usually when we feel out of our depth, it's usually down to one of these 5 things. And I wonder if you relate to any of these this morning. So the first one is this, is we have this idea that we need enough money to be successful, that most of us will say, well, when I have enough money, well, then I can be happy, then I can buy the things I want, then I can be generous, when I have enough money. But he says the reality is it's not about how much money you have. He said the other thing is this, is there's materialism. We all think, well, once I get that new car, or once I get that new house, or once I get that new thing, well, then I'll feel happy, then I'll feel better about myself. Then I'll be in that place where, I am more confident, or I think better about myself. But the reality is, the truth is, even the people with all the stuff in the world will tell you they're not always happy. He said the other thing that we do is we follow the corporate dream, where we think, well, when I get that pay rise, or when I get that promotion, when I get that title, well, then I'll feel like I've arrived. Then I'll feel like, well, I should be here, and I'm allowed to be here. And the thing I find with that one is the older I get, the less and less I feel like that. I was thinking to myself earlier, leading a church in your early 30s. Not many people that do that. Why would you do that? Everybody else that I've met has been older. I don't know if you've ever felt that, where you think, one day I'll feel old enough to be doing whatever I'm doing. And I've got some great friends, some great people in our lives who are like in their 70s. And they still say, one day I'm hoping that I'll feel like old enough to be doing what I'm doing. It's like, but you're in your 70s. And they're like, yeah, but I still don't really feel old enough. In my head, I'm still like 21. So we could be going up the corporate one. The other one is this whole social acceptance, and I guess it's come to the fore from the whole rise in social media, that if I have enough followers, if I'm invited to the right things, if I'm part of the right groups, then that's how I'll know that I've arrived. But the one that really struck me, and I don't know if you've ever related to this either, is the last one is this, is the power of other people's opinion. That actually so many of us think, well, I want to know that everybody else thinks like I think, or they like me, or they like what I'm doing. And we live in this world where we can't function if we don't know that everybody likes us, or we can't function if we don't know that everybody else likes what we're doing. And this one particularly I found challenging because it goes so against what the Bible tells us that we should be worried and thinking about. The truth is this, there's only one you. God has only made one version of you, and it's you. And so actually, it's not about how much money you've got, how much stuff you've got, what titles, promotion you have, how many followers you've got on social media, what other people think of you. Our primary concern should be, what does God think and say about us? But so many of us live our lives with this question: what does it take to be enough? And Sarah and I often have this conversation. How do we know when we're good enough? How do we know when it's satisfactory enough? And I don't know if you've ever related to that. If you have, I don't know, maybe a boss at work and you think, I don't know what I need to do to make them be happy at the end of the day, and say, oh, that's good, well done. Because there's always something else. There's always someone else that wants our attention. There's always something else that could be done. And so as we think about this message this morning, building a better future, I've titled it Future Now. Because as we read this passage in a few moments, and as we think about this today, we realize that what we hope and believe for in our future starts with what we do and think and say right now. That actually we can't wait until the future is here before we start to live in it and experience. That actually if you want a great future, it starts right now. You can shape your future literally sat here in church today. That in a year, 5 years, 10 years' time, you can be walking towards a future that begins today. And one of the key phrases I want you to take on board with this idea is being about future people. That future people are now people. That they're not people who are daydreaming, waiting for the future to arrive. But actually, we're going to make intentional decisions today to bring us into and move into the future that God has got for us. So if you've got your Bibles with you, we're going to read a few verses from the book of Acts and chapter 16. Just a couple of verses from 11 down to 15. And this is just a snapshot of the person who I kind of want to zoom in today for us to look at. And like I say, when we're thinking about this series, this person really stood out to me. So just to give you a bit of context for these verses. So Olivier was talking last week from chapter 17, which is kind of what happens after this. But the first part of this chapter, Paul, the apostle, sets out on his missionary journey. The scholars and people talk about he had 3 missionary journeys. He did 1, he did 2, and then he sort of did half of 3 and then got arrested, which is not a great way to end a journey. But this is the middle of his second one, and this one he kind of skirts around parts of what is now modern day Turkey, and then kind of comes, I don't know if you know the geography, kind of comes from Israel, Jerusalem, up through Turkey, and then comes back round through Greece. And Olivier was looking at last week at the sort of the journey from sort of Greece as he came down to Athens. But we're going to look at the bit as he tracks up through Turkey. And so he sets out on his journey. He sets out with a friend, a guy called Silas. They meet Timothy on the way. This is where Timothy first appears. They visit some places. And just preceding this, Paul has this dream about a man from Macedonia. I feel like that should be a name for a song. Anyone want to write a song called The Man from Macedonia? But he has this dream about a man in Macedonia that says, Paul, why don't you come to Macedonia? That's quite literally the dream. That's dead simple. You don't need a dream interpreter for that one, do you? And so he says, I think God wants us to go to Macedonia. So they head out to Macedonia. And on their way, they come across somebody in, and that's who I want to look at today. So in verse 11 it says this: from Troas we put out to sea and sailed straight for Samothrace. Great fancy terms in this. The next day we went to Neapolis. From there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of the district of Macedonia, and we stayed there for a few days. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gates to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak with the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira, named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart and she responded to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited them to her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. So this is a really interesting story. As Paul has been called to Macedonia by this man in a dream, they come to Philippi and they go down to the river, it says. Now, just to understand a little bit about the context that Paul was traveling in. So Paul was from a Jewish background, and his general practice when traveling was to go and talk to Jews first. He would always go and talk to Jews first about Jesus and about the gospel and the message because they were his people. That's who he wanted. But often what would happen, as we read last week, is they'd either be really interested and go, that's great, Paul, thanks for coming and sharing us, or they'd get very upset and start throwing stones. So then his general practice was, well, if the Jews aren't interested, then we'll go and speak to anyone and everyone everyone else who was interested. So they went down, and it says they were expected to find a place of prayer. So basically what that means is they were looking for the synagogue. They were looking for the local Jewish community so that they could go and pray and talk with them. But what they end up finding is a group of women praying next to the river. Now, we read that and go, well, that's great. Isn't that nice of them? It's probably quite warm there. What a great place to pray. But what we don't understand is this. The fact that they found women praying by the river meant there weren't, A, many Jewish people in Philippi. B, there weren't many Jewish men in Philippi. Because in order to form a synagogue, which is like a church, a bit like this, a community of Jewish believers, you needed 10 Jewish men in order to have a synagogue. You could have as many women as you wanted, but if you didn't have 10 men, you ain't having no synagogue. Now, it doesn't say actually how many people there were, how many women there were praying, but we know there weren't 10 Jewish men. But yet these women gathered anyway to pray. They gathered anyway in spite of all that was going on. And the thing that's great about this story is there's a book in the New Testament called Philippians, which is Paul's letter to the church in Philippi. And what a lot of people kind of begin to piece together, that this incident here is the beginning of that church, that this is the moment that this church begins to form and grow as Paul talks with Lydia. The other thing that's really interesting is this, that Lydia is mentioned by name. Now again, in our context, in our culture, that's a normal thing. If you know someone's name, you use it. But in a Jewish, Roman, Greek culture, women still didn't have the same place and value in society that men had. So often women would be known by who their husband was or who the significant man in their life was. So we read about this person, Lydia. It tells us that she didn't have a significant man in her life. Now, we don't know whether she was widowed, whether she had a husband and he went, or she'd just always been an individual person. But I love that it says this, that she was a wealthy and successful business person. She dealt in purple cloth. Purple cloth in those days was one of the most expensive commodities that you could trade in. It'd be a bit like today saying, she's big in Bitcoin. There's that thing that not many people know much about, but like those who are in it, they're like really in it. And she was big. She ran a business selling purple cloth. And so I think she stands out to me as somebody who was a forward thinker, someone who was thinking about the future, because she'd pioneered her own business. She'd established or been part of establishing the Jewish community in that town. And as Paul comes, she responds to his message. I love what she says with her. I love what she says to them afterwards. If you consider me a believer, then you have to come to my house. Then she extended them hospitality. And so I want us to spend a few moments this morning just looking at Lydia, that she was somebody who saw the future, but she didn't wait for it to arrive to do anything about it. She made choices in her present to begin to shape and take hold of the future that she wanted, that she believed for her life. And it can be really easy that for some of us to maybe think of ourselves as not being like fully there yet. That maybe you're living your life as a Christian and you think, I'm a little bit out of my depth. I put my hand up to a prayer one time and now suddenly my life is moving in this direction and I'm not really sure what's going on. Maybe some of you are involved in serving or leading things and you think, how did I even end up doing this? Why am I leading or serving in this capacity? And it can be so easy to discount ourselves. It can be so easy to think that we don't meet the level or the standard that is required. But the thing I love about this story was Lydia didn't meet the social, the religious. She didn't meet any of the standards of the day. Like Paul should have been starting a church in Philippi with a wealthy, well-taught Jewish man. And yet he finds himself with a female business owner who didn't qualify for spiritual, title. Like there were no female rabbis at that time. She ran a business. She'd been trained in selling purple cloth, not in building or running and leading a church. But yet we find that that's who Paul talked to. That was who he came across in that moment. And sometimes it's not about the qualification. Sometimes it's not about the things that we have pre-existing. Sometimes it's just being there in that moment. And I love the fact that we can tell from this little glimpse we get about Lydia that she was somebody who could put things into place. Like she'd set up an established business. She was able to provide for herself and her family. And a lot of the times, like I say, we don't know this exactly, but a lot of the times when women were widowed, they lost their source of income. They lost their place in society. They lost everything. So if she was widowed, if she did have a husband, maybe it was his business that she took on, she'd done really well to keep that going, to keep providing and making that business work. If she didn't have a husband and it was her own business, she'd done even better to break into that market and to be successful in that way. And so I want us to think this morning, what do people like Lydia, what do future thinkers, what do future people look like? And before we get into this, I want us just to remember one thing, that the people who come into contact with Jesus, as you read through the Gospels, as you read through the book of Acts, very few of them had intended to, were planning to, be part of changing the world when they met Jesus. But in that moment where they encountered Jesus, or they encountered the Holy Spirit, or Paul began to tell them about Jesus, suddenly their lives were changed. And many of us, too, maybe our intention wasn't to be on that journey, to be going in this direction. Maybe you didn't think of yourself in your 10-year life plan or whatever it was to be in church this morning. But the truth is this is where we are. And I believe that if we're here this morning, then God has something to say to us. God has something to do in us and through us. But I wonder how many of us this morning are sat here thinking, not me. Any of you thinking that? Maybe look at the person next to you and say, yeah, I don't think he's talking to me. We so easily and quickly discount ourselves from the plans and purposes of God. We discount ourselves, maybe even from the future that we'd like, or the dreams that we have for our lives because of maybe what's happened in the past or what we're experiencing in the present. I think Lydia would have been a not me kind of person as well. I think if you'd have spoken to Lydia the day before she met Paul, that Saturday by the river, if you were to say to yourself, hey Lydia, do you think in thousands of years' time people will be talking about your business and your little group of ladies and women that you pray with? She would have gone, no, not me. I'm not significant enough. I'm not important enough. I've had to fight for every little thing that I have in my world. Why would anybody be interested in my story? But yet she meets Paul. She's in that place. She's open to what God is doing. And all of a sudden, thousands of years later, we're talking about Lydia because she had a conversation with Paul by a river. Later on in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, John has this dream, and Jesus gives these messages to different churches, and the message to the church in the city where Lydia was is mentioned. So even at the end of the world, at the end of time, what Lydia does, what Lydia starts in this conversation with Paul, has an influence, has a power, has the ability, and it has shaped our future. And there are sort of three things that I want to highlight, that if we want to be future people, if we want to be part of shaping the future for ourselves, for our lives, but also for our family, for the community around us, there are three things that we need, three kinds of people that we need to be or be thinking of. The first one is this, is we need to be people of influence. People like you. Look at the person next to you and say, people like you. There we go. People like you. So people like you are people of influence. And I wonder this morning, who do you influence? If I ask that question, who do you influence? Does anyone here think, I don't really influence anyone? Who thinks I don't influence anyone? Most people, that would be our default. I don't really influence anyone. Well, I want to say you influence far more people than you think. This is where I need my friend Brandon. Brandon is going to come and help me this morning. And it's funny when you invite guests and friends to church, the observations they make. Often we can't see the influence that we have on other people because we're quite close to them, and it often takes somebody outside of our circle. So Brandon here this morning is rocking a very nice baseball cap. It's original. Look at that. So if you looked at Brandon this morning, who would you think had influenced him? Exactly. That's it. That's what you needed to do. So yeah, quite a few guest speakers have come and they've seen Brandon in glasses and a baseball cap and gone, "Oh, is that your mini-me?" And we're going, "What?" He's just wearing a hat and glasses. But this is the thing. Sometimes we don't realize the people that we have an impact on. We don't realize the people that we're influencing, maybe by the way that we dress or maybe by the way that we behave. But I think there are three groups of people that we all have had an influence on, sometimes for good, sometimes not for good. But these are all people in our world that we influence, whether we realize or not. The first one is this, your family. And I think, to be honest, your family is the hardest group of people to influence. Or to see the influence that you have, because they're the people that see you all the time. They're the people that have seen you grow up and change and develop. They've seen you on your good days and your bad days. And sometimes the people that are closest to us, it's hardest to see the impact that we're making. But I would say you have all been put and placed in a family, the people in your world, your children, your parents, your brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, all of those people are people that you can influence, that you can have an impact on, that actually, whether we realize it or not, they are probably watching how you live, how you think, how you behave, and they're drawing influence from that. And I think the key is this: future people realize that we are having an influence on others. Future people think that, well, actually, if I consistently behave in a certain way, that's going to get noticed, and that's going to get picked up by other people. And so I want to challenge you today, maybe to start thinking about how conscious are we about how we're living and thinking and speaking in the way that we influence other people. The other one is friends. I think friends is probably a slightly easier group of people to influence, because usually we select our friends, and we're a little bit more probably selective about how we behave around certain friends. Often certain friends will know us for certain behaviors or habits that grow in that. It's been really nice the last few years to reconnect with some school friends and seeing how people have changed, and how just because you used to do one lesson with one person, you realize like they're more than just that person you sat next to in English or maths, like that they are a more complete person. But often our friends, we let them into parts of our lives, but not every area. They don't see every part of our lives like our family. But yet in the same way, we can influence them. And I think it's easy to be selective about how we influence them, because friends will come to us for advice on things. They'll ask us about, what should I do about this? What do you think about this? And they often invite influence, whereas, I don't know, in my family, they don't tend to invite influence in the same way. It's just by nature of being together. The last group of friends is, is your work colleagues. Or those people that you spend more selective time with. And I remember, I've only ever had one proper job. That was when I worked for Morrison's for 2 years while at Bible college. But the thing I found really strange about working at Morrison's, other than the ridiculous uniform, was that it became quite apparent quite quickly that I was a Christian, because I didn't do stuff on Sundays and different things. But what ended up happening was a lot of the other colleagues would end up talking and asking advice from me about stuff, and I'd never said, I'll tell you how to live your life. But obviously there was something about me that they were drawn to, and I think that can be the same for us as well. Often we wonder how those work connections form, because obviously it's a very forced environment, isn't it? We're all here to do a job, but actually sometimes people catch a glimpse of something in us, and they're drawn to that, and sometimes it's not always something that we're promoting. It's not something we're out there. In fact, to be honest, if you went into a new job and you just started to give people advice on their lives, should you really be going out with that person? They'd probably get upset with you quite quickly. But when they come to you and say, look, I'm in this relationship with this person and it's not really working out for me, what do you think I should do? That's very different. But we all have people that we influence. And I don't want you to discount yourself this morning, because the Bible is full of people that should have been discounted, but that God used to influence other people. For example, write one of these down that sticks out to you. Abraham was too old. Elijah had suicidal thoughts. Joseph was abused. Job went bankrupt. Moses had a speech problem. Gideon was afraid. Samson was a womanizer. Rahab was a prostitute. The Samaritan woman was divorced. Noah was a drunk. Jeremiah was too young. Jacob was a cheater. David was a murderer. Jonah ran away from God. Naomi was a widow. Peter denied Christ 3 times. Martha worried about everything. Zacchaeus was too small and money hungry. The disciples fell asleep when they were supposed to be praying. I've never done that one, just to say. That last one's definitely not me. But maybe there's one in there that you relate to. Maybe one of those life circumstances resonates with you, and maybe you've discounted yourself for one of those things. But actually the Bible tells us that God used all of those people to influence, because people who shape the future are people of influence. The second type of people that we need to be, and we need to think of ourselves, is in the passage after this encounter with Lydia, it says that Paul and Silas were then followed around by a girl that was demon-possessed. And I find it quite funny that she went around telling everybody, these men have come to tell you about Jesus. They've come to tell you that Jesus wants a relationship with you. She was like a great promotional tool. Like, I don't know why they got so annoyed, because everything she said was true. But it got a bit annoying, and I think maybe they realized that although she was saying all of the right things, it wasn't coming from the right place. So one day they took this girl aside and they said to her, hey, look, we want to pray for you. And it says that they prayed for her and the demon left her, but she was then useless to the people that had been using her because they were using her to make money. I don't know what she was doing outside of this, but obviously people were taking advantage of it. And so the people who were making money off this, taking advantage of this girl, they got very upset, and Paul and Silas find themselves in prison. But it got me thinking that even though Paul and Silas were in chains, they were still able to make a difference, because while they were in the prison, this miraculous thing happened where they were able to escape. And sometimes we think being in chains, sometimes we think the struggles and the problems that we carry in our lives are there to contain us. But very often, like in this case, they're there to be the platform for a breakthrough. They're there to be a platform for God to show up in a way that it wouldn't be possible for him to do any other way. And so maybe you're thinking this morning about the circumstances and situations in your life, that maybe there are things that you struggle with, that you're working through. Maybe you feel chained to certain things and you think, well, this must discount me from being used by God. But I want to challenge you this morning and say maybe those things are a way that God is setting something up in your life to bring about a greater change, a greater future than you could imagine right now. Came across this little interesting story this week about somebody. It says this: in 1959, the police were called to a segregated library in the United States because a 9-year-old boy refused to leave without being lent books. Now, that sounds insane, doesn't it? A kid getting arrested for not wanting to leave a library. But it was a segregated library. It was 1959. You can imagine the tensions that were going on. But it says this boy, same boy, went on to gain a physics degree and eventually became an astronaut. And in 1986, he died in the Challenger space shuttle accident. Today, the library that wouldn't lend him books in 1959 is named after him. That man was called Ronald McNair. His picture should appear on the screen. There you go. He was denied books from a library that is now named after him. And I think that God uses stories like this, uses things in our life as we think about our future, that maybe the very problems and challenges and struggles we have now are the things in the future that once that transformation, once that process of change has happened, that will be something that we look back on and think, well, if it wasn't for that moment, then this impact couldn't be made. Paul and Silas were chained up in a prison. An earthquake happened, all of their chains fell off, and they were able to relate to the prison guard. And not just the prison guard, but his whole family, it says, became Christians because of this earthquake and this incident in the prison. And maybe there are things in your life today that you feel chained and imprisoned by, but actually the moment that God breaks in, the moment that God breaks through, suddenly opens up a whole new future for you, certainly, but also for the other people around you that will witness and see that change. The last kind of people that I want us to think on and be focused on, be thinking about, future people, are people in prayer. While Paul and Silas were in prison, people were praying for them. It says that Paul found Lydia and that group of Jewish people because they'd gone out to pray, that they found them praying. And I think we can never underestimate the power of prayer. The power of making space and time for Jesus in our lives is the best, I think, the best way to welcome God's future into our lives is to take time to be found in a place of prayer. And I love this idea that it's when we often create that habit and that routine and that rhythm of prayer that things begin to change. That actually praying isn't just giving God our shopping list. Praying isn't just letting God know what's going on in our lives, in our world. Prayer is about aligning ourselves, aligning our thinking, aligning our feelings, aligning our outlook with what God is seeing. And I think if we want to be future people, if we want to be thinking about what legacy we're going to leave for our children and our children's children, what impact we can have on the world around us, is not just about praying that God would change the situations and circumstances now, but that God would allow us to see beyond maybe just this moment, maybe see beyond just the change or the struggle that we've got, maybe just see beyond the people that we're influencing now and see actually what is out there, that if we can align ourselves with God's plans and purposes today, then we are welcoming in his future to our world now. The definition of faith that the Bible uses in the book of Hebrews says, faith is the evidence of things not yet seen, the substance of things hoped for. And basically, any of us who have faith, any of us who believe in Jesus are future focused, because we're believing that what God says will come is going to be how we choose to live now. So think about your life. Think about where you're at. Think about your challenges, your circumstances. Do you live defined by those? Or do you think to yourself, well, God has promised me something better and brighter in the future, so I'm going to choose to live in his promise rather than in the reality of my present? Or do you think of yourself, well, when that blessing comes through, when that prayer is answered, when that thing, that circumstances or that trouble is turned around, well, then I can have faith because I will have seen it? Or are you going to choose to be someone that has faith now? As I was thinking about sharing this message and maybe what God wanted to say, I really felt that there were a couple of areas that God was wanting to speak into, that if we can choose, if we can learn to be people of prayer, if we can learn to be people who align our hearts and our minds and our thinking with God, then it changes the very nature of what we're experiencing. That maybe today, for some of us, the breakdown in life, the breakdown in relationships, the breakdown that you're feeling and experiencing is leading to a breakthrough. That actually the struggle that you're facing right now isn't a sign or a symptom that God's not interested, that you're in the wrong place, you're doing the wrong thing. Maybe it's a sign that God is leading you to something. Maybe some of us, if we can become more prayerful in our lives, we can develop that habit and that routine, that maybe the hold-up that you feel that you're experiencing is the very area that God wants to lift you up. And sometimes we can feel stuck and trapped in a circumstance or a situation. We can think, well, why is this not happening for me? Why is this not working out as I wanted? And quite literally, it can be as simple as, a bus being delayed and you having a conversation with someone at the bus stop. Sometimes it can be as simple as, you not being in the place at the time you thought you were going to be. And that interruption is often God's way of bringing someone or something into your life. Maybe you're experiencing or you're processing some hurt in your life at the moment. Maybe these things have been said or done and you're carrying that hurt, you're carrying that pain. But I wonder if this is God's opportunity to allow you to experience his amazing and miraculous healing. That you're not discounted, you're not cut off, you're not separate, that actually, even though you're experiencing this pain, God wants to reveal himself as a healer. The last one is this. Maybe you feel you've been defined, or others have defined you by the failings that have taken place in your life. And this is one of the things I could never understand, is why as Christians, why as people who believe in Jesus get so hung up on people who make mistakes, on people who don't get it right, why we're looking for perfection in other people. Because actually I think every time we make a mistake, every time we get it wrong, every time we fall short, it's just another moment that God can display his amazing forgiveness. That actually, if we can align our thinking, if we can change how we view ourselves, how we view the world around us, that we can say, actually, my mistakes this week allow me to be more forgiving in the future. Allow me to be more gracious to others, but also they allow me to trust and rely on what God is saying and doing right now. Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, he says this, "For this reason I kneel before God the Father, to whom every family in heaven and on earth derives their name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with the power of his Holy Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have every power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide, how long, how high, and how deep is the love of Christ, and to know that his love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. To him be the glory in the church and in Jesus Christ throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. You know, this is what Paul prays for the church in Ephesus, the church that Timothy was leading. It's the church that was struggling, was going through a really hard time, and Paul prays for them. He says, I pray that even in the midst of all you're going through, you would know Jesus more, that you would know his presence, you would know his love, you would know his power, that it would become real to you. Because that's the power of prayer, that even in our deepest, darkest moments, even in our moments of breakdown and failure and hurt, God is able to do something in our present, but also for our future. Heard a great quote this week from another church leader. It says this: the church building cannot meet the needs of all of the people in the community or all of the people who come to use it. The church is more than just a building. It's more than just a program. It's more than just a ministry. But future people see the future now. And we're in, I think, a really key moment as the world, as a country, where we've got choices, decisions to make about things like climate change, around human and civil rights, around politics, around finances, where the decisions we make now will influence and impact the future that comes. But also for us as Christians, for us as followers of Jesus, for us as the church, we've got decisions to make about what we do now that's going to impact and shape the future to come. Because out of that conversation that Paul had with Lydia, out of that moment came a church, came a community, came a group of people that we still talk and read about now, because there's a book in the Bible called Philippians. I believe that what God is doing in you all right now will be noticed in the future. We're not necessarily going to get a place in the Bible. I've given up on that hope a long time ago. But there will be children, there will be adults, there will be people who, for years to come, because of something they noticed about you, because something they observed about what God was doing in you, is going to shape and impact their future. And you may never get to hear about that. You may never get to see about that. I hope that most of us do, because it's so encouraging, it's so rewarding. So just as the worship team come back up, I want to leave you with this one final passage, this final thought. Can we stand together, maybe in response to what you have picked up, what you've heard God saying to you today? But there's this great story in the Old Testament, in the book of Isaiah, where Isaiah has this amazing revelation, this picture of God, and he sees angels, and it's all crazy. And he has this moment where he suddenly realizes he's out of his depth. He says, "Woe is me." He says, "I'm not worthy to be here. I love it. He's like, I've said some bad stuff. Like, I've called people some terrible things. I don't deserve to be in God's presence." And he goes through this process in this dream that he has, where he experiences God's mercy, where he experiences God's forgiveness. And then it says this: he hears a voice. He hears God saying, "Whom can I send? Who is going to be my representative? Who is going to be a future now kind of person? Who is going to live a life for the generations of the people that come?" And in verse 6, it says this: "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send for me? Who will go for us?' And I said, 'Here I am. Send me.'" And I think quite simply, if you remember nothing else from this morning, hopefully you remember a bit more than this, but if you only remember this, it's God is only looking for an open heart. Lydia happened to be in the right place at the right time. Isaiah was ready and willing to respond because he heard the call of God. God didn't put out a job advert. God didn't say submit to your CVs. He just said, who's going to go? Who will be that person? And I feel like God is saying that to us today. Will we be people who invest in the future? Are we people who are going to look to the future in how we live and act today? Are we gonna put aside that sense of, am I good enough? Am I ready? Am I prepared enough? And just believe that if God has called us, if God has brought us here, then we can do something. So as we sing this morning, maybe you want to respond. Maybe you just want to, like Isaiah said, and just say, yeah, God, I'm here. What is it you want to say? What is it you want to do? Maybe there are some things that have just triggered a memory, something in your life today, and maybe you just want to open up yourself to God and say, God, yeah, I've disqualified myself. Yeah, God, I still feel stuck, but I want your breakthrough. Maybe you just want to realign, refocus your life this morning. Maybe you've realized you've wandered. You've just got a few moments as we sing just to pray, just to focus on Jesus and allow him to speak and to heal and to minister to you. So come on, let's stand together as we sing this song.